Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Chinello Oasisai stood before the grand mirror in her rose gold dressing room, wrapped in silk and sorrow. The luxury that adorned her body couldn't mask the emptiness that echoed through her soul. Married for 7 years to one of Nigeria's most powerful men, Chief Arinze Oasisai, Chinello had everything: wealth, influence, a sprawling mansion with glass chandeliers imported from Italy. Yet, what should have been a complete life felt like an unfinished story. The whispers of her in-laws, who once celebrated her beauty and elegance, now stung with venom. She's barren. She's eating the man's wealth and giving nothing in return. And though Arinze never uttered those words himself, Chinello felt them in the silence of his longing stares at family portraits where their child should have been. She didn't hate him. No, he had been good to her. But his kindness made her feel worse. The softer he was, the more ashamed she became. Every night she cried silently, begging God to bless her womb so she could silence her tormentors and prove she was worthy of the Oasisai name. She had tried everything, from private fertility clinics in South Africa to herbal mixtures from obscure villages. Chinello left no path unexplored. They had spent millions on treatments: IVF, hormone therapy, alternative medicine, each failure chiseling a deeper crack into her heart. The pressure wasn't just from outside. It had burrowed into her very identity. Being the wife of a billionaire was one thing, but being the mother of his heir was the crown she was desperate to wear. When other women visited with their children, and her husband would kneel to play with them, Chinello felt an irrational flare of jealousy. She'd smile politely, but deep down she was screaming. When Arinze once said, "We'll be fine even if it's just us," it only made her feel more broken, like she had failed him and was being pitted. And so, Chinello kept smiling in public, dressing like a queen, attending high-profile events. Yet behind closed doors, her soul was drying up. But Chinello was not born wicked. She was a woman carved by circumstances, sculpted by societal expectations, and weathered by emotional storms. She still lit candles for orphanages and funded scholarships for poor children. Yet, all these good deeds couldn't heal the ache of her empty womb. One night, as she lay in her bed unable to sleep, she placed her hand on her flat stomach and whispered, "Please, just one child. Just one, Lord. I will give anything." It was a prayer not of greed, but of desperation. She imagined what it would be like to hold her own child, to watch him grow, to call her mummy, to carry the Oasisai name into the future. That night, she promised herself and her God, the moment her child came, she would protect him with everything: her name, her wealth, her soul, and if necessary, her secrets. Though the Oasisai mansion was filled with the sounds of running staff, automatic gates, and expensive appliances humming softly, Chinello's heart remained painfully quiet. Every room she walked into carried an invisible ache, a constant reminder of the child she never had. The nursery they once decorated in anticipation now remained locked, a frozen relic of hope. On some nights, Chinello would sneak in and sit quietly in the rocking chair, cradling a soft teddy bear, imagining what her baby's laughter would have sounded like. No one dared question her sadness. Even the walls of that house had learned to stay silent. Her husband, Arinze, kept a soft but distant affection. He would often call to check on her during business trips, buy her rare perfumes, or kiss her forehead during family dinners. But Chinello saw the worry in his eyes. He was beginning to lose faith. The silence didn't only live in their house. It now lived in their marriage bed too. Their conversations had shifted from dreams of their future child to managing business investments, choosing charities, or planning vacations they never took. Arinze had become consumed by work. While Chinello never doubted his love, she feared his patience had limits. His family, especially his mother, had stopped pretending to be subtle. During festive gatherings, she would make offhand comments like, "Children bring true joy," then glance meaningfully at Chinello's stomach. It was cruel, but Chinello bore it all in silence. What hurt most was how her fellow society, wives who used to envy her, had started to pity her instead. She was the only woman in their circle without a child, and it made her feel like a shadow in her own life. Even the staff had started treating her with reverent distance, as if childlessness made her fragile. She had thought of adopting just once, but even that idea felt like defeat. In her world, heirs had to be born of blood. An adopted child, no matter how loved, would never carry the Oesai lineage. Chinello knew the weight of tradition, especially in elite Nigerian families where lineage meant everything. Her silence grew heavier by the day, and in that silence, her prayers became more desperate. At night, she would kneel on her Italian marble floor, pressing her head to the ground, whispering through tears, "Let me carry him. Let me raise him. Let him call me Mummy." And then, one unexpected morning, her world changed. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines. For the first time in years, the silence in the Oasisai mansion was broken, not by words, but by the thundering of Chinello's heart. But fate, as always, had more plans in motion than she knew. The day Chinello discovered she was pregnant felt like the beginning of a new world. She didn't scream, didn't faint. She just stood there in her bathroom, hand trembling, tears sliding down her cheeks, as the 2 bold pink lines on the test strip glared back at her. She touched her belly, still flat, still untouched by life, and whispered, "Thank you." In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the Oasisai mansion shifted. She walked with purpose, her eyes brighter, her steps lighter. Her husband, Arins, was overjoyed but cautious. "Let's keep it quiet until we're sure," he said, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. It was understandable. They had been through too many losses, too many near joys turned into grief. But Chinello already believed this was her miracle. She started praying out loud. She started talking to her stomach. She started becoming a mother. It was during one of her quiet walks in the garden that she noticed her maid, Amaka, vomiting discreetly behind the mango tree. Chinello called her over gently, concerned, and asked if she was all right. Amaka hesitated. Her eyes filled with worry, then confessed that she too had just discovered she was pregnant. A moment of silence passed between them, then Chinello, instead of reacting with anger or judgment, hugged her. "We're both expecting," she said with a smile. It was an unusual bond, madam and maid, but one that grew deeper with every shared craving, every mutual discomfort, every whispered prayer. Chinello started inviting Amaka to her room to watch TV together. They laughed over old Nollywood films, cried during baby documentaries, and even argued over baby names. The entire mansion seemed to smile with them. Chinello felt for the first time like she wasn't alone on the journey. Their relationship began to feel like sisterhood. Chinello even asked Amaka to attend her prenatal classes with her, saying, "Our children will grow together. They'll be best friends." The walls between class and status blurred. Chinello was still madam, and Amaka still bowed slightly in greeting, but something had shifted. They shared secrets, childhood stories, fears about labor, and dreams for their unborn children. The staff whispered in awe at their closeness. Chinello told herself this was God's way of healing her heart, that through Amaka, she had found a friend and partner in motherhood. But fate, cruel and silent, was already writing a different ending. One that would change both women forever. For now, they basked in joy, unaware that the same wounds bringing them together would also tear their lives apart. The days that followed their dual pregnancies became the most peaceful Chinello had known in years. She and Amaka were like an unlikely pair of blooming flowers, one from rich soil, the other from dry ground, yet both rising with shared sunshine. Chinello began requesting that Amaka serve her personally, not out of dominance, but out of comfort. They'd sit together in Chinello's luxurious sitting room, sipping sobo drinks and massaging their swollen feet while exchanging stories about their childhoods. Amaka spoke about growing up in a village where pregnancy was celebrated with song and dance, and Chinello laughed at the idea of villagers chanting praises around swollen bellies. Chinello, in return, shared how her elite upbringing had been lonely, strict, and devoid of such joy. Slowly walls between madam and maid dissolved, replaced by womanhood, laughter, and dreams. For the first time, Chinello didn't feel like a woman under pressure. She felt like a mother in waiting. The two women often took walks together through the garden behind the mansion. They would stop under the guava tree, their hands instinctively resting on their round bellies, as they imagined how their sons would play together, grow together, and challenge each other in school like brothers. "Yours will be the quiet one," Amaka joked once. "And yours the stubborn one," Chinello had replied, laughing. It wasn't forced, it was real. Even the staff in the mansion were stunned at the shift in dynamics. Chinello would personally pack fruits for Amaka, and once, she scolded another maid for overworking her. Chief Oesai watched from a distance, amused and touched by his wife's transformation. "I've never seen you this light," he once said, hugging Chinello tenderly. But she knew why. She finally had something to hold on to: hope. Every time she felt her baby kick, and every time she saw Amaka smile, she believed more that God had answered her prayer. As both pregnancies neared full term, Chinello took steps to prepare the house for their new arrivals. She ordered a brand new crib from Dubai, designed a baby room with golden wallpaper, and even included a smaller corner for Amaka's child, insisting that the baby would be like family. "We'll raise them side by side," she said more than once. Amaka was hesitant at first. She didn't understand why a woman like Chinello would draw her so close, but she cherished every moment. She felt seen, heard, and cared for, something she hadn't felt since her own mother died. One evening, Chinello held her hand and said, "Amaka, God sent you to me. When I see you, I don't see a maid. I see a woman like me, a mother." Amaka wept that night in her small quarters. She didn't know fate was already planning to tear her heart in ways she couldn't imagine. But for now, in that mansion, there was peace. It was around 2 a.m. when Amaka went into labor. The screams from the servant quarters jolted the entire mansion awake. Chinello, despite being heavily pregnant, rushed down barefoot, her silk robe brushing the floor. "Call the driver. Get her to the hospital," she shouted, cradling Amaka's head and whispering, "Breathe. I'm here." In a blur of chaos, Amaka was wheeled into the hospital. She held Chinello's hand tightly, refusing to let go. "Don't leave me, madam," she cried. Chinello stayed until the nurses pushed her back and took Amaka inside. A few hours later, a baby's cries pierced the hospital hallway. Amaka had delivered a healthy, strong baby boy. The staff rejoiced. Chinello cried tears of joy and rubbed her belly. "Soon mine will be here too," she whispered. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with light. But joy turned to ashes just hours later. Chinello's labor came suddenly and violently. She was rushed into the emergency room, and despite the doctor's efforts, her child was stillborn. The silence in the delivery room was louder than any scream. Chinello lay on the hospital bed, numb, her body cold despite the blood and sweat. "No heartbeat," the doctor whispered. "We're sorry." The world shattered in that moment. All the hope, all the joy, all the prayers had led to a lifeless child. Chinello stared at the ceiling, unable to speak. Her heart didn't break, it imploded. The air around her felt poisonous. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just lay still, eyes wide, unable to accept that her long-awaited baby was gone. The dream she built with Amaka was now a ghost wrapped in white cloth. And that was when the darkest thought entered her mind. Lying there in silence, she overheard a nurse talking about Amaka's baby being the biggest boy born tonight. The words echoed. Something shifted in Chinello's spirit, something desperate, something haunted. Her lips trembled as she whispered to the doctor on duty, "I need to talk to you. Alone." The next few minutes became a secret that would bury every joy they had shared. Chinello offered him money, an amount too large to ignore. Her request? To switch the babies before anyone knew. The doctor resisted, but her words were surgical. "She's just a maid. No one will question anything. Give me her child and bury mine. I'll pay you enough to vanish if needed." It was cruel, it was monstrous, but it was born of grief. Chinello wasn't herself anymore. She was a woman drowning in despair, clinging to a lie to keep breathing. And so, with trembling hands, the doctor agreed. The babies were swapped. One mother was given hope, the other devastation. Amaka opened her eyes to a foggy morning, her body aching but her heart expectant. She waited for the nurses to bring her son. She imagined his face, wondered if he'd look like her late father, or have her nose. But when the nurse walked in, holding a wrapped baby with no cries, her smile faded. "Madam, I'm so sorry," the nurse said softly, handing her a still baby. "He didn't make it." Amaka's scream could be heard across the maternity ward. "No, no, that's not my baby," she shouted, her voice cracking like glass. She refused to believe it. "I heard him cry. I heard a baby cry," she sobbed. But the nurse shook her head and walked out. Alone in that room, Amaka unwrapped the baby's face, searching for something, anything, that looked like her. But all she found was silence and confusion. Her world, once filled with shared laughter and dreams, became a pit of disbelief and mourning. She begged to see the doctor. She pleaded to recheck. But everything had been neatly covered up. The corrupt doctor, cold and calculated, assured her that some babies don't survive the stress. The report was signed, the death registered, and Chinello's hands were clean. Amaka cried endlessly. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong. Her body told her the baby she birthed was alive. But no one listened. Chinello never visited her after that day, a silence that pierced Amaka even deeper. She had expected comfort, a shoulder, a word. But there was none. She was discharged 2 days later and sent back to the mansion, to clean, to cook, to carry a heart that had been mutilated. The staff welcomed her with sad eyes. No one knew the truth. No one suspected the switch. No one imagined that a woman of wealth could take a baby not hers. Meanwhile, in another wing of the hospital, Chinello cradled the baby boy, Amaka's son, against her chest. He was named Jason Oasisai, the boy that would carry her husband's name, the heir she always longed for. But as she looked into his eyes, something stirred. He didn't cry. He didn't reach for her. There was no connection. Chinello convinced herself it was exhaustion. She whispered lullabies she once planned for her real son. But deep down, something didn't sit right. She dismissed the thought and pushed herself into mother mode. She smiled for pictures, accepted congratulations, and thanked God publicly. But inside, guilt coiled around her heart. A bond stolen. A grave secret birth. Chinello believed she had done what any mother would do, but what she didn't know was that one day, that child would find his way back to the woman who birthed him, and the truth would come knocking. Amaka returned to the mansion like a shell of herself. The woman who once glowed with motherhood now walked like a ghost, her eyes sunken, her voice trembling, and her silence too loud for comfort. The staff tried to console her, but their words floated past her ears. She moved about the kitchen slowly, touching the corners like a grieving widow, tracing memories. Her breasts leaked milk that had no mouth to feed. At night, she would lie on the cold floor of her small servant room, hugging the little cap and socks she had secretly bought for her son. "I know you're not dead," she whispered often. "I know it." She remembered the sounds from the hospital, the clear cry of a baby, the nurse's hurried steps, the moment she blacked out, and the eerie calm when she woke up. It didn't add up. Nothing added up. But who would listen to a maid? Who would question a doctor paid in silence? Chinello never came to see her. Not a single call, not a visit, not a message. Amaka felt not just loss, but betrayal. This was the same woman who had held her hands and promised their children would grow together. The same woman who fed her from her plate and wept with her during early contractions. Now she was gone, replaced by silence and shadows. And then Amaka heard it. News from another maid that Madam delivered successfully. Confusion clashed with pain. Delivered? When? How? Didn't they go to the hospital together? Amaka's stomach churned. She tried to approach the topic with others, but they brushed her off or avoided her gaze. "Be careful," one cook warned. "This house can end your life." Fear crept in. She had no power, no voice, no proof. But in her gut, she knew her baby wasn't dead. He was stolen. In the weeks that followed, Amaka watched from a distance as Chinello cradled the baby boy in designer clothes, feeding him with gold-tipped bottles, walking him in imported strollers. The child looked strong. His eyes were alert. And though Amaka had never seen him closely, her soul screamed each time their paths crossed. She longed to walk up to Chinello and demand the truth, but every time she tried, Chinello looked through her like glass. No acknowledgement. No shame. Just perfection painted over sin. Amaka's heart bled in silence. She often stood by the nursery door when no one was around, just to hear the baby's faint giggle. It gave her hope, but her hope was fragile. One wrong word, one accusation, and she could lose her job, or worse. So she said nothing. She cooked, she cleaned, and she waited. For what, she didn't know. But something inside her told her this lie couldn't live forever. Jason Oasisai grew up in splendor, with nannies at his beck and call, a custom nursery, and a mother who ensured he had everything a child could need. Yet, despite all the richness that surrounded him, it was the moments with the lower staff, particularly Amaka, that he cherished most. From a young age, he gravitated toward her. Something about her touch calmed him. When Chinello held him, he cried often. But when Amaka carried him, he fell asleep with ease. As a toddler, he would waddle down the back staircase to Amaka's quarters, curl up in her lap, and fall into the deepest slumber. Chinello didn't notice at first. She thought it was just convenience. Children often took to servants. But as Jason grew older, the bond didn't weaken, it grew. He called Amaka Auntie Mama, and would often run from formal family events just to spend time in the kitchen with her, laughing as she stirred stew or kneaded dough. Amaka, cautious but full of love, tried to maintain her boundaries. She still believed the child was hers, yet she didn't want to stir the waters. It was enough, for now, to hold him when he ran to her, to whisper prayers into his ears, to sneak him extra chin-chin, and tell him bedtime stories rooted in her village childhood. Jason loved those stories. They made him feel real, grounded, more than the robotic recitations taught by his foreign tutors. Chinello began to grow irritated. Every time Jason disobeyed or acted stubborn, she blamed Amaka. "He's picking up peasant behavior," she once snapped. Amaka overheard, but she smiled. Jason was alive. That was all that mattered. She could endure the insult, the labor, and the long nights, as long as he was near her, even if she couldn't call him son. She was waiting for the right time. A sign. A confession. Something. The tension between Chinello and Amaka intensified slowly. Chinello began limiting Amaka's interactions with Jason, giving strict orders to other staff not to encourage familiarity. But Jason was persistent. No matter how many games or gadgets Chinello provided, he always ran to Amaka. It was in his blood, though he didn't know it. When he was 8, he once told Amaka, "I think I'm yours." Amaka froze. "What do you mean, my dear?" she asked, heart pounding. "I just feel like I belong with you," he whispered. She swallowed her tears and nodded. "Maybe you do." From that day, her faith deepened. Something unspoken had been planted in Jason's soul. And no matter how hard Chinello tried, she couldn't break that invisible thread that tied mother to son. Not money, not threats, not all the riches of the Oesai Empire. By the time Jason turned 10, Chinello's jealousy had turned into quiet rage. She no longer saw Amaka as a harmless servant. She saw her as a thief of affection, a thief of control, and perhaps, though she dared not admit it aloud, a thief of truth. Chinello had raised Jason with the finest things, luxury schools, designer clothes, custom-built playgrounds. Yet he preferred Amaka's wooden spoon and bedtime proverbs. "What does she have that I don't?" she once screamed at her reflection. "Why does he love her more?" The shame was unbearable. She had done the unthinkable, taken a child that wasn't hers, and now she was losing him emotionally. The very child she risked everything for was slipping away. So Chinello did what the desperate often do. She plotted to erase the threat. Quietly, ruthlessly, she started small. She cut Amaka's shifts, changed her schedule, assigned her to distant duties around the compound. But Jason noticed. "Where's Auntie Mama?" he would ask. Chinello lied at first. "She's sick, she's busy, she's on leave." But Jason wasn't convinced. One evening, he snuck into the kitchen and found her scrubbing pots in silence. He ran to her, hugging her tightly. Chinello saw from the hallway. That night, something in her broke. The next morning, she accused Amaka of stealing jewelry. A sapphire necklace, to be precise, one she had hidden herself. The police were called. Amaka was dragged out of the mansion in handcuffs as the staff watched helplessly. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just looked at Jason, who stood behind the living room curtain, confused and afraid. Their eyes met for a second. Then she was gone. Chinello ensured she was locked away, bribing officers to bury the case. "Make sure she disappears," she instructed. Jason was sent to boarding school that weekend. She told him Amaka had gone to care for her sick mother in the village. "She may be gone for a long time," she added coldly. Jason cried that night. Alone in the dormitory, he clutched the little wooden carving Amaka once gave him, a symbol from her tribe meaning, "You are loved." Chinello, now rid of the threat, believed she had restored balance. But peace born from lies is never real. And while Jason adjusted to school and the house resumed its quiet order, far away in a dark, crowded cell, Amaka whispered prayers that no mother should ever have to say. Prayers not just for justice, but for reunion, and above all for truth. The day Amaka was dragged out of the mansion will forever remain scorched into the memory of every domestic worker present. Her wrists were bound in handcuffs, her head bent low, but her spirit refused to shatter. She didn't scream or protest. She didn't beg. She looked around with quiet defiance, especially at Chinello, who stood in the marble-floored hallway with folded arms and no remorse in her eyes. "She stole from me," Chinello told the police officers, her voice sharp and calculated. "I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent." No one dared intervene. The staff had seen people rise and fall in that house, and they understood the invisible code. Speak, and you're next. The necklace Chinello accused Amaka of stealing was one she herself had hidden weeks earlier in a locked drawer. She planted the entire scene, called the police herself, and timed it when her husband was away in Abuja for a business conference. The plan was flawless, cold, ruthless, necessary, or so she told herself. Amaka's time in prison was dark, both physically and emotionally. The small cell she shared with 5 others reeked of sweat and rot. Her mattress was a torn sack of foam, her meals barely edible. But it wasn't the hunger or the stench that broke her, it was the silence. She had no lawyer, no hearing, no voice. Chinello had paid enough to make the file vanish into legal limbo. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Every day, Amaka counted time by watching shadows crawl across the cement floor. She sang lullabies at night, the ones she used to sing to Jason in the kitchen. Some inmates mocked her, called her mad. But she didn't care. That boy was her life. And though she was locked away, she held onto the hope that one day, truth would break through. She never let go of the memory of Jason's eyes, how he always looked at her like he knew her soul. Back in the Oesai mansion, Chinello moved quickly to erase Amaka's memory. She had the room cleaned, the mattress burned, the baby trinkets tossed. The staff were given firm instructions. No one was to speak of that girl again. "If I hear her name in this house, you're out," she warned. Fear silenced them. Even the gatekeeper, who once called Amaka daughter, now avoided her name like a curse. Jason, now away at boarding school, was kept in the dark. Chinello made sure no letters got to him, no phone calls slipped through. He called once asking to speak to Amaka, and Chinello lied easily. She moved. Far away. Family emergency. "We don't know when she'll return." Her voice was sweet, but her heart was ice. She believed the storm had passed. But what Chinello didn't know, what she had forgotten in her arrogance, was that secrets have a way of growing teeth. And Amaka, bruised but breathing, was still alive. When Jason returned home for the holidays, the mansion felt wrong. The housekeeper greeted him with a half-smile, the chef avoided eye contact, and the guard at the gate barely nodded. It was like a silent film, where everyone had forgotten their lines. Jason noticed immediately that something or someone was missing. The hallway that once echoed with Amaka's soft humming was quiet. Her framed picture with the staff, once placed in the common kitchen corner, was gone. He searched the servants' quarters and found it locked. When he asked Chinello about Amaka, her answer was sharp and brief. She left. Her mother fell sick. She had to return to the village. We don't expect her back. Jason furrowed his brows. But she didn't say goodbye. Chinello simply walked away, pouring wine into a glass with a tight smile. People come and go, Jason. Don't be too sentimental. Jason wasn't convinced. He asked other staff, but they all repeated the same rehearsed line. She left. She's not coming back. We're not allowed to talk about her. Their discomfort was clear. Even his favorite gardener, Uncle Paul, avoided his eyes when Jason pressed him. Madam, say make we no talk, Paul muttered finally before walking away. Jason felt like the walls were closing in. The joy of homecoming vanished. He wandered the house with his hands in his pockets, hoping to hear her voice, smell her cooking, see her crouched behind the kitchen door telling stories to the laundry maids. But all that was gone. His heart grew heavier with each passing day. He missed her fiercely, not like a nanny, not like a maid, but like something deeper. Something he couldn't explain. In his dreams, she appeared holding him, singing, calling him my son. He'd wake up sweating, confused. Chinello, sensing his mood, tried to overcompensate. She threw him a small welcome-back party, bought him a new tablet, hired a music tutor to distract him. But Jason wasn't interested. He sat through dinners without touching his food. He wandered into the nursery at night, the same one Chinello once decorated years ago, and sat on the floor for hours. One night, he took a framed baby photo of himself and turned it over. On the back was a sticker that read, Baby B, 2:45 a.m., Ward B. Something about the label unsettled him. The name didn't match the records Chinello once told him about. I was born in Ward A, she had said. Room 3. You came at 4 a.m. Jason held the photo tighter, eyes narrowing. Something wasn't adding up. The house was hiding something. And whether anyone liked it or not, he was going to find out what. It was a humid Wednesday evening when Jason heard voices echoing down the hallway. Chinello's door was slightly ajar. He was walking toward the stairs when he froze at the sound of his name. You act like the girl is innocent, Chinello was saying, her voice raised. You weren't here. You didn't see how disrespectful she became, trying to control my own son. I did what I had to do. Jason moved closer, his heartbeat thudding like a drum. Chief Oasisai's voice came next, tired and angry. She was a maid, not a criminal. You had her arrested and locked away without a trial. Do you even hear yourself? Chinello's reply was sharp. You think I didn't notice how close they were? How he clung to her like she birthed him. I had to protect him. That woman was poisoning his mind. I gave her everything, and she repaid me by stealing his heart. Jason stood there, trembling. His ears rang. Did his mother just say Amaka was locked up? That she was framed? His chest tightened. Every lie she told, the fake story about Amaka's sick mother, the silence from the staff, it all made sense now. He stepped back, accidentally kicking the edge of a side table. The conversation stopped abruptly. Chinello flung the door open, her eyes locking onto him. Jason, she said, her voice neutral. What are you doing here? Jason's lips quivered. Why did you lie? Why did you do that to her? Chinello's calm mask cracked. You're a child. You don't understand these things. You should be grateful for everything I've done for you. Jason took a shaky breath. You said she went to the village. You lied to me. You hurt her. Chinello snapped. You need to know your place. You're my son. You live in this house because of me. Don't forget that. Jason's eyes welled with tears. He turned and ran, ignoring her calls. He stormed past the dining room, past the waiting staff, out into the night. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then heavier. He didn't care. He ran blindly through the compound, through the open gates, into the street. His mind was a whirlwind of betrayal, grief, and confusion. He didn't hear the screeching tires. He didn't see the black car racing around the bend. The impact was sharp, sudden, and brutal. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud, his head bouncing off the pavement. The driver didn't stop. Within seconds, neighbors screamed. Call ambulance. Call ambulance. Jason lay still, blood pooling beside his head. Back at the mansion, Chinello collapsed at the gate, screaming his name into the night as guilt, fear, and reality finally came crashing down like the rain. Jason's small frame lay motionless, as the rain soaked his bloodied school shirt and curled his fingers into the muddy roadside. The neighborhood quickly erupted into chaos, onlookers shouting, some calling for help, others pulling their phones out to record. It took barely 5 minutes before the mansion's security arrived, and by then Chinello had run barefoot into the road, wailing, "That's my son! That's my son!" The irony of her cries pierced the heavens. The boy she stole now lay at death's door, broken, not by the car that hit him, but by the emotional wound she had inflicted moments before. She dropped to her knees beside him, shaking his limp shoulders, screaming for him to open his eyes. Chief Oasisai arrived moments later, stunned by the sight of his wife on the ground, soaked in blood and rain, cradling a boy who hadn't moved in minutes. "Call the hospital. Get the car now," he bellowed, his voice raw and cracking. The drive to the hospital was tense and silent. Chinello sat in the back seat, cradling Jason's head on her lap, whispering tearful apologies between choke sobs. Chief Oasisai drove like a madman, breaking traffic rules, ignoring honks and blaring horns. His heart was heavy with confusion, not just about Jason's injuries, but about the heated argument he and Chinello had moments before the boy ran off. Had Jason heard? Did he know now? The questions stabbed his brain like knives. At the hospital, doctors rushed Jason into the emergency unit. "He's lost a lot of blood," one nurse said. "His vitals are unstable. We need a donor match immediately." Chief Oasisai volunteered first. He was taken to the lab for blood typing. Chinello, shaking, followed behind him. Her feet felt like they weighed tons, her stomach twisted with dread. Deep inside, a storm was building, and it had nothing to do with the car accident. Jason's tears had not been visible during the collision, but the emotional storm inside him had burst hours earlier, when he overheard his mother confessing the truth, that she had falsely accused the woman he loved, the woman he trusted. His world unraveled. He had no one else. No siblings. No cousins. Amaka was more than a maid to him. She was home. She was the only one who made him feel seen, not managed. Chinello had given him everything material, but Amaka had given him something richer: comfort, protection, warmth. As Jason lay unconscious in the hospital bed, a single tear slipped from his closed eye, as if his soul were still weeping. Machines beeped around him. A nurse whispered that his pulse was low. Chief Oasisai paced the hallway outside, fists clenched. Chinello sat in a chair across from the nurse's desk, her lips moving in frantic prayer. "Don't take him," she whispered. "Not like this. Not now." Inside the emergency room, the doctors worked tirelessly. Jason's injuries were internal: a fractured rib, a concussion, and worst of all, massive blood loss. "We need a transfusion now," the lead doctor shouted. Nurses sprang into action. Within minutes, Chief Oasisai's blood test results returned. "He's not a match," the nurse said carefully. "His blood type is incompatible." Chinello, hearing the verdict, immediately stood up. "What about me? I'm his mother. Take mine." She was ushered into the lab for testing. Her hands trembled as the syringe pierced her vein. Her mind screamed prayers louder than her lips could move. "Please let it match. Let it match. Don't let the truth come out this way," she muttered. She was panicking, but not just because her son was dying, but because she knew there was a chance her blood wouldn't match. A real, terrifying chance. After what felt like an eternity, the nurse returned. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply handed the report to the supervising doctor. Chinello rose. "What's the result?" she asked. The doctor looked up, confused. "Ma, the blood type doesn't match either. You're not a suitable donor." Silence fell like a curtain. Chief Oasisai turned sharply. "What?" he asked. "What do you mean she's not a match?" The doctor cleared his throat. "Sir, based on standard compatibility, neither of you are viable donors. If I may ask, is there any chance the boy is adopted or not biologically related?" The hallway grew cold. Chinello's hands dropped to her side. Her knees buckled slightly, and she reached for the wall to steady herself. "It must be a mistake," she said quickly. "Maybe the test was wrong. Run it again." But even as she spoke, she knew the lie was unraveling. Chief Oasisai stared at her. His eyes widened slowly as suspicion flooded him. His voice was low, dangerous. "Chinello, is there something I need to know?" Chinello didn't answer. The doctor excused himself. The silence between husband and wife was thick with tension. Chinello knew what came next. The moment she had feared since the switch. Either she confessed and destroyed everything, or she held on to the only truth anyone believed about her, that she was Jason's mother. Tears brimmed in her eyes, but not from grief, from guilt. The screeching tires that hit Jason were only the climax of a disaster she had put into motion years ago. She wanted to scream, to beg forgiveness, to go back and undo it all. But she couldn't. What she had buried with silence was now clawing its way to the surface, covered in blood and sorrow. The next few hours felt like a nightmare stretched thin across time. Jason remained unconscious, his skin pale, his breathing shallow. Every minute without blood increased the risk of permanent damage or death. The doctors worked around the clock, contacting blood banks across Lagos, searching for a rare donor type. Chinello remained seated, motionless. Her hands were clasped so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She didn't dare meet Chief Oasisai's eyes again. He hadn't spoken to her since the results. His silence was louder than thunder. He just paced back and forth, occasionally stopping to glance at his son through the glass window. His face, once filled with confidence and power, now looked haunted. As each new nurse walked by without answers, hope thinned. Chinello's mind was a prison. Every memory flashed before her in slow motion. Amaka smiling in the kitchen, the doctor's trembling hands during the switch, Jason calling Amaka Auntie Mama. The night she lied to the staff, the night she had Amaka dragged in cuffs out of the mansion. She thought of every prayer she once said, every promise she broke, every warning she ignored. Now here she was a mother, or at least pretending to be one, and she could do absolutely nothing to save the child she stole. Her world, once held together by lies and wealth, was cracking open like an eggshell. Her tears had dried. What remained was a dull ache, the type that only confessions could soothe, but confessions that came with consequences far worse than shame. The doctor returned late that night, frustration evident on his face. "We've checked all hospitals within our radius. We're extending the search statewide now. But he doesn't have days, he has hours." The words echoed like a funeral bell. Chief Oasisai sat down slowly, his jaw clenched, and for the first time since the incident, he turned to Chinello. "Tell me the truth," he said quietly. "Is he my son?" The question was heavy, final, brutal. Chinello's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her eyes met his, and all the years of deception began to close in. She had reached the crossroad. Her empire, her marriage, her carefully crafted reality, all now stood at the edge of a cliff. The truth waited like a blade. One step forward, and everything would fall. Behind the glass, Jason's chest rose and fell faintly. Time was running out, and with it, Chinello's mask was finally beginning to slip. The hospital corridor fell into a strange, suffocating stillness after Chief Oasisai's question. "Is he my son?" The words hung in the air, sharper than any scalpel. Chinello stared blankly ahead, unable to meet her husband's gaze. Her body was there, but her spirit had collapsed into pieces. The weight of years of silence bore down on her shoulders, and her lips trembled. But she said nothing. Chief Oasisai didn't shout. He didn't plead. He simply stood there, broken and wounded in his pride. If Jason wasn't his son, it wasn't just a betrayal. It was a mockery of everything he stood for. His lineage, his legacy, his love. He paced a few steps away, then turned sharply. "Chinello, answer me. You said you gave birth. You said he was mine. So what is this?" His voice cracked. "What are you hiding?" Chinello rose slowly from her seat, her knees weak and rattling like dry bones. She moved toward him as if dragged by invisible chains. "I didn't cheat on you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think." He looked at her like a stranger. "Then what is it?" Why doesn't his blood match mine? Why doesn't it match yours either? Chinello's breath hitched. Her mouth opened again, but fear closed it. She could confess everything right there. She could tell him about the dead baby, the switch, the bribe, the guilt, the sleepless nights. But then what? She would lose everything. Her reputation, her husband, the child she had come to love like her own. And worse, she would be exposed as the woman who stole another's motherhood. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "It's a mistake," she muttered. "It has to be a mistake." But even as she said it, her lies were crumbling. The doctors were already considering a second round of DNA testing. Chief Oasisai made a few private calls. He no longer trusted Chinello's word, and that broke her more than the fear of exposure. In a matter of hours, more people would know. It was only a matter of time before the real story emerged. She turned to the chapel down the hallway, entered it, and dropped to her knees before the altar. Her prayers were no longer graceful. They were frantic, jumbled, and desperate. "God, please forgive me. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to be a mother," she sobbed. But God was silent. And outside that chapel door, the truth was waiting, not just with files and blood samples, but with footsteps echoing from a prison cell where a real mother had never stopped waiting for her child to come back. The hospital buzzed with quiet urgency. Jason's condition remained critical, his heartbeat irregular, his breathing shallow. Machines beeped steadily, counting down the seconds that no one could afford to waste. As blood banks expanded their search and doctors whispered in corners, Chief Oasisai made a decision. He called a private investigator. "I need every detail from the night of that delivery. Records, nurse statements, CCTV. I want the doctor's full history." "Something doesn't feel right," he said firmly. The investigator, a calm man in his 50s with sharp instincts, assured him the report would come quickly. Chief Oasisai wasn't the kind of man who liked questions without answers. And now, his world was riddled with both. In his heart, he hoped the test was wrong, that maybe some mix-up had occurred. But a quiet, creeping voice told him otherwise. Something bigger had been hidden. Something rotten. Meanwhile, Chinello sat motionless in the chapel, her fingers still clasped. She had prayed until no more words would come, but peace didn't find her. Instead, memories flooded her mind. The look on Amaka's face when the dead baby was placed in her arms, the cries of disbelief, the silence that followed. She remembered her own moment of collapse when she had found her lifeless son in the delivery room, how she felt the world turn black around her. But instead of accepting the pain, she ran from it. She tried to fix it with lies, and now everything was falling apart. Her tears had dried. Her eyes were red, but her heart remained tangled. "What have I done?" she whispered. And the voice inside her answered, "You destroyed a life to pretend you had one." Upstairs, Jason stirred slightly, his hand twitching under the blanket. A nurse noticed and checked his vitals. "He's responding," she said with cautious hope. The doctor came quickly, examining him, adjusting his four. "We still need that transfusion," he warned. Chinello was informed and rushed to his bedside, gripping his cold fingers. "Stay with me," she whispered. But when Chief Oasisai walked in behind her, his face was blank. "The investigator is already looking into the records," he said flatly. "And I've requested a private lab to run another DNA test." Chinello's hand froze on Jason's. "Why would you do that?" she asked shakily. "Because I need the truth," he replied. "You won't give it to me, so I'll find it myself." Chinello wanted to scream, to explain, to plead. But what words could undo the sin of swapping a mother's joy for her own lie? Far across the city, a phone vibrated on a dusty table in a cramped apartment. Dr. Keene, the very doctor who had orchestrated the secret baby switched 10 years ago, stared at the screen. He hadn't received a call from Chinello Oasisai in years. Not since the night she handed him a thick envelope and whispered, "No one can know." But now her name was flashing on his screen again, and his hands trembled. He picked up slowly. "Hello." Her voice came through, shaky and urgent. "Keene, something's happened. The boy, he needs blood. They ran tests. The types didn't match. Arin's is suspicious. I need your help." There was silence on the other end. "Are you insane?" the doctor hissed. "I told you this would happen. I told you lies don't stay buried. I'm a licensed doctor. If this comes out, I'll lose everything, my license, my family. I could go to jail." Chinello's voice cracked. "Please, just deny it. If anyone comes to you, say you don't remember. Say the records are missing. They're digging into that night, and if they find the switch," she trailed off. The silence was heavier now. Dr. Keene wiped sweat from his brow. His life had moved on. He had transferred hospitals, started a new life, kept his head low. But that night haunted him. He still remembered the look in Amaka's eyes when she asked about her baby. He had lied to her face. And for what? Money? Fear? Guilt? Now the lie had come full circle. "You need to come clean," he said finally. "You need to confess before this becomes something worse." Chinello let out a bitter laugh. "Confess? And lose everything? I can't. I just can't. Please, Keene. I'm begging you. If you still have a soul, protect me." The doctor didn't respond. He ended the call and sank into his chair. On his shelf was a sealed brown envelope labeled Oesai Delivery, 2015. He had kept it all these years, afraid to destroy it, afraid to open it. A time bomb of truth. As he stared at the envelope, he wondered what justice would look like now. Meanwhile, Amaka sat in her cell, unaware of the chaos unfolding outside. She hummed softly, clutching a worn handkerchief, the only thing she had left from the hospital that night. Her spirit had not broken. Deep inside, she believed God would fight for her. And as the truth began to bubble to the surface, the one thing no one could stop was already in motion. Justice was coming. And when it arrived, it would knock politely. It would shatter everything in its path. Chinello Oasisai sat outside the hospital's chapel, her eyes blank, her thoughts spinning in slow-motion chaos. The past was now her present, no longer buried, no longer safe. Every corner of her memory echoed with the voices she had tried to forget. The doctor's hesitation, Amaka's screams of grief. The first time Jason reached for Amaka instead of her. She could still remember the bribe she gave, the trembling hands that passed the baby into her arms, the silent decision to lie for the rest of her life. She had built her motherhood on another woman's pain. And now, as she watched Jason cling to life behind a pane of glass, she felt that pain multiplied. "What if he dies?" she whispered to herself. "What if I lose him, not just to death, but to truth?" Her stomach turned. She was no longer afraid of judgment. She was afraid of being forgotten, of being unloved. For 10 years, she had been called Mama Jason. She wore the title proudly, strutted in wealth, hosted naming ceremonies and school events with elegance. She had built a brand around her motherhood, photographs on magazine covers, stories of endurance. But what would they say now? What would society say if they found out her son wasn't hers? That she stole him? Worse, that she locked up the real mother to protect the lie? The world wouldn't forgive her. Arins would never look at her again. The Oesai name would be tainted. But all of that paled in comparison to one thought that tore her soul apart, that Jason might never forgive her. Not even if she saved his life. Not even if she confessed now. Her entire being trembled at the idea that the boy she had raised and truly loved might one day look her in the eye and say, "You are not my mother." Chief Oesai stood by the window, arms folded, jaw tight. He hadn't said a word to Chinello in hours. He couldn't. Every time he looked at her, his mind swung like a pendulum, between disbelief and rage, grief and guilt. He didn't know what to do, or who to believe anymore. The DNA results would arrive in the next few hours, and with them, clarity. But clarity meant consequences. And no matter the outcome, their lives would never return to normal. He turned to Chinello suddenly and said, "If that boy dies, I'll never forgive you. And I hope you'll never forgive yourself." Then he walked away, his footsteps echoing in the marble corridor like judgment. Chinello didn't cry. She simply bent forward, her face buried in her hands. Her sobs were silent this time. Her motherhood, once envied, now exposed, was about to be put on trial. And in the balance hung the soul of a child who was never hers to claim. Jason's heartbeat weakened just after midnight. A monitor beeped erratically, and the doctors rushed in with urgency. His oxygen levels are dropping, one nurse shouted. We need the transfusion now, or we'll lose him. The blood search had yielded no viable matches across the local database. Chinello stood frozen by the door as panic erupted inside the ICU. Every scream from the nurses felt like a knife to her chest. Chief Oasisai had disappeared to make more calls, desperate for a solution. Chinello walked slowly toward the glass and pressed her hand against it. Jason lay there, pale, breathing shallowly, his tiny chest rising and falling like a flickering candle. Say something, she whispered. Call me Mummy. Just once. Please. But the boy didn't move. A nurse burst out of the room and asked again, Ma, do you know of any relative? Any possible donor at all? Even distant? We're running out of time. Chinello blinked slowly. The answer was buried deep within her, and it was time to dig it out. Her feet moved toward the waiting lounge, as though pulled by a force beyond her will. She sat alone for a long time, gripping her phone, staring at Dr. Keene's contact. She could expose everything. Call him. Bring him in. Tell the truth. But then what? Would she be arrested? Disgraced? Would Jason survive only to hate her? Her hands trembled. She heard footsteps behind her. Chief Oasisai had returned. He was no longer furious, just hollow. He sat beside her and stared at her without saying a word. Then he asked quietly, You have one more chance to tell me. Is he my son? Chinello's breath hitched. Her lips parted. She turned toward him, face raw, voice thin. The word stopped there. She looked down at her trembling hands and whispered instead, What if he never was? That single sentence shattered the remaining silence between them. The final scene of Part 1 closed in the ICU, where Jason's life hung by a fragile thread. Outside, two parents sat, surrounded by silence, secrets, and the loud thump of guilt. The nurse reappeared, holding a clipboard. If we don't get blood within the hour, I'm afraid we'll lose him. Chief Oasisai turned to Chinello, eyes wide. So what now? He asked. Chinello said nothing. She stood up slowly, walked down the hallway with uncertain steps, her heart bleeding, her lies unraveling. Behind her, her world crumbled. Ahead of her, the truth waited. Somewhere in a prison cell, a real mother whispered a prayer she'd whispered every night for 10 years. God, bring my son back to me. And as the storm reached its silence, only one question remained. Will she confess, or will she let the world believe she was never a mother at all? To be continued in Part 2. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.